A flight attendant saw a young black woman in a hoodie sitting in a $14,500 seat and decided she didn't belong there. She called security. She won for less than an hour. Then her airline ceased to exist. If you want to watch an entire corporation collapse because of one woman's arrogance, hit subscribe and don't go anywhere. There is a particular kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive draped in logos or trailing the sharp scent of new leather. It doesn't demand a better table or a faster car. It simply exists quietly, completely, and without the slightest need for your acknowledgement. Most people never learn to recognize it, and for some, that ignorance becomes the most expensive mistake of their lives. Chicago O'Hare International Airport at 6:45 on a Tuesday morning was exactly what it always was: a controlled storm of rolling luggage, overhead announcements, and 10,000 strangers moving through the same space with 10,000 different urgencies. But inside the Harmony Terminal, Terminal H, where Pinnacle Airways operated its premium international concourse, the noise dropped away like a curtain being drawn. The Pinnacle Prestige Lounge was hushed and golden lit, smelling of Ethiopian single-origin espresso and the kind of leather furniture that had never once been sat on by anyone in a hurry. Soft jazz moved through the air like something that had always been there. In the far corner of the lounge, away from the clusters of business travelers in tailored suits and the older couples reading physical newspapers, with the careful attention of people who had all the time in the world, sat a young woman who looked entirely out of place and was entirely unconcerned about it. Her name was Zara Coleman. She was 24 years old. She wore a faded black Harvard Business School hoodie, the kind that had been washed enough times to go soft at the seams. Her jeans were Levi's, broken in at the knees, and her sneakers were a pair of original 1985 Nike Air Force Ones, scuffed and worn, but worth more than most people's rent if you knew what you were looking at. She had wireless noise-canceling headphones around her neck, not over her ears, because she was listening. On the open laptop in front of her was a 200-page financial risk analysis document. Dense columns of leverage ratios, debt service coverage metrics, and projected liquidity scenarios. The company being analyzed was Pinnacle Airways. The document had been submitted to a Goldman Sachs syndication team 3 weeks earlier under a coded project name. The author's signature on the final page read, Z. Coleman, Senior Analyst, Coleman Capital Strategic Division. Zara had written every word of it. She scrolled slowly through the executive summary, making margin notes with the quiet focus of someone who understood that the numbers on the screen represented real planes, real people, and real consequences. She had recommended the $950 million bridge loan. She had argued for it internally against 2 senior partners who thought Pinnacle was too structurally compromised to save. She had won that argument with data. What she did not yet know was that before the morning was over, she would wish she had lost it. Across the lounge, near the Florida-soiling windows that overlooked the pre-dawn tarmac, a woman stood watching the room with the practiced stillness of someone who had spent nearly 3 decades deciding who mattered. Patricia Holloway was 54 years old, 28 years a flight attendant, and for the last 11 of those years, the senior purser of Pinnacle Airways' flagship Prestige Suite cabin. Her uniform was pressed to geometric precision. Her brown hair was set in a rigid, lacquered wave that hadn't moved since 1997. Her customer service smile was world-class, warm, immediate, and absolutely hollow. Patricia had what she privately called her gift. She could look at a person from across a room and know, within 30 seconds, whether they belonged in her cabin. She had never once considered that a gift built entirely on assumption was not a gift at all, but a trap. One she had been setting for herself year after patient year, without ever realizing the jaw was already closing. She looked at Zara Coleman in the corner, with the worn hoodie and the canvas backpack, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not alarm, not curiosity, just a quiet, settled certainty that landed in her chest like something familiar and comfortable and deeply, catastrophically wrong. She didn't act on it yet, but the thought was already there, fully formed, but waiting for the boarding call, like a lit match, waiting for wind. The boarding call for Pinnacle Flight 1112 to Miami came at 7:20 a.m., echoing through the Harmony Terminal in the calm, measured tone that premium airlines used to make even departure sound like an invitation. Zara closed her laptop, slid it into her worn canvas backpack, and stood up without hurry. She moved through the lounge toward the gate, passing a row of travelers in cashmere coats and carrying bags that cost more than small cars, and not one of them gave her a second glance. At the gate, the boarding agent scanned Zara's phone. The digital barcode read cleanly. The scanner flashed green. "Welcome aboard, Miss Coleman. Seat 1A. Have a wonderful flight." Zara nodded, slung her backpack over one shoulder, and walked down the jet bridge onto the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. She turned left into the prestige suite cabin, a hushed sanctuary of cream leather pods and indirect lighting, where 12 passengers would cross the country in the kind of quiet that money couldn't buy in any other context. She found seat 1A, tucked her backpack into the overhead bin, and folded herself into the wide leather seat with a sigh that was mostly relief. She closed her eyes. She had 3 hours before Miami. She intended to sleep through all of them. Patricia Holloway was standing at the forward galley when Zara walked past. She watched the backpack go into the bin. She watched the hoodie settle against the leather headrest. She watched, and the thought that had been waiting since the lounge clicked forward one quiet notch. Vivian Hartwell arrived 2 minutes later. She was 51, impeccably turned out in a cream Chanel suit, a classic flap bag on her forearm, blonde hair cut in the kind of shape that required weekly maintenance. She settled into seat 2A with the practiced ease of someone for whom first class was simply the correct default. She glanced at seat 1A, then she glanced at Patricia. It was a small look, the kind that didn't need words, because the words had been spoken that way 1,000 times before. A look that said, "Are you going to do something about this?" That was the moment. Not the backpack, not the hoodie, not Zara herself. It was that look offered and received between two women who had never met that launched everything that followed. Patricia smoothed her already perfect uniform, picked up her silver beverage tray, and walked into the cabin. She smiled at Stuart Crane in seat 1B, offered him a mimosa, received a distracted thank you, and then turned toward 1A. Her expression shifted in a way that was almost invisible. The warmth left first, then the openness. What remained was something that wore the shape of professionalism, but had something else entirely underneath. "Excuse me," Patricia said, her voice perfectly calibrated, sweet enough to pass for polite, but carrying a precision that made the words land like small stones. "I think there may be some confusion about your seat." Zara opened her eyes. She looked at Patricia without alarm, without aggression, just a clear, level gaze that had seen this particular brand of confusion before. "There's no confusion," Zara said evenly. "I'm in 1A. Patricia's smile tightened by a fraction that only someone watching closely would notice. "This is the prestige suite, sweetheart. These seats start at $14,500. If you'd like, the main cabin is just through the—" "I know what this cabin is," Zara said. "I'm in 1A. Zara Coleman. The gate agent scanned my boarding pass 2 minutes ago." She reached into her pocket and held up her phone, screen brightness at maximum, the boarding confirmation unmistakable. Patricia looked at it. She saw the name, she saw the seat number, she saw the green confirmation stamp, and she did not move. Because what Patricia's brain did in that moment, what it had been trained by decades of unchecked assumption to do, was construct an alternative explanation. A screenshot, a glitch, someone else's account. Anything but the straightforward, obvious, completely accurate truth sitting right in front of her. "Anyone can pull up a screen," Patricia said, her polite facade dropping one more layer. "I need to see the physical card used to purchase this ticket." In seat 3A, a man named Dr. James Whitfield set down his book. He was 61 years old, a professor of civil rights law at Yale, and he had spent 40 years documenting exactly the kind of moment that was unfolding 18 inches in front of him. He reached slowly, quietly, into his jacket pocket and pressed record. From seat 2A, Vivian Hartwell crossed her legs and said nothing. Crane turned to the window. The silence, warm and comfortable and utterly complicit, settled over the prestige suite like a second skin. Zara kept her tone level, her posture still, and her eyes on Patricia, the decision to refuse to give someone the reaction they were built to provoke. "I don't carry the physical card," she said. "The ticket was booked through a corporate account." It's an internal transfer from Coleman Capital. The gate agent already verified the boarding pass. The system turned green. Patricia's chin lifted by a fraction. Coleman Capital, she repeated, with the particular inflection of someone tasting a word they don't believe. Right. And you don't have the card because I'm not required to, Zara said. Not by federal aviation regulations. Not by Pinnacle's own boarding policy. You scanned my pass at the gate. This conversation has no procedural basis. For a moment, Patricia said nothing. The silence stretched in the cabin like something elastic being pulled too far. Then Patricia straightened, clasped her hands in front of her, and said in a voice just loud enough to carry, I'm going to need you to step out of the seat while I verify this with ground operations. She added, for the cabin's benefit, I apologize for the inconvenience, everyone. We want to make sure all our prestige suite guests are properly accommodated. The framing was perfect. Zara was the problem. Patricia was the solution. Vivian Hartwell made a small sound of approval. Stuart Crane still hadn't turned from the window. Zara reached into her backpack and pulled out her laptop. She opened it to the final page of the 200-page Coleman Capital Risk Analysis and turned the screen toward Patricia. Z. Coleman, Senior Analyst, Coleman Capital Strategic Division. Patricia stared at it. You work in finance, she said flatly. Good for you. She had no framework for what she was looking at. Zara closed the laptop. She looked at Patricia for a long, quiet moment. You're about to make a catastrophic mistake, Zara said, her voice so calm it almost sounded kind. Not for me. For yourself. I'm giving you one opportunity to walk to the front, check the manifest, call the captain, and end this right now. I don't need to check anything, Patricia said. You don't belong in this cabin. There it was. The word, naked and final, dropped into the pressurized air of the cabin without apology or qualification. Belong. Dr. Whitfield's thumb pressed harder against the recording button. Patricia walked to the forward galley and called ground security. Zara sat back in her seat. She placed both hands flat on the armrests, felt the cold of the leather under her palms, and breathed. She thought about her father. She thought about the first time she had understood, at 8 years old, that some rooms in this country had invisible walls, and that the only people who couldn't see the walls were the ones who had put them there. Then she thought about what her father would say when she called him. 2 airport security officers and a Chicago PD officer named Reed arrived at the gate 7 minutes later. Officer Reed approached seat 1A with the expression of a man who had been handed a situation that was already wrong before he got there. He checked his tablet. He checked the manifest. He looked at Patricia. He looked at Zara. Miss Coleman, he said carefully, your name is confirmed on the manifest. The purser has filed a formal disruption report, which under federal aviation regulations requires me to remove you from the aircraft, pending the captain's review. I need to ask you to step off while the captain makes his determination at the gate. Captain Ossie was in the cockpit, running the pre-departure checklist and had not yet been reached for his authorization. That failure of process, the fact that Patricia had escalated directly to ground security without going through the flight deck, was itself a violation of Pinnacle's own crew coordination protocol. It was the kind of shortcut that nobody had ever stopped her from taking before. Zara looked at Reed for a moment, not with anger, but with something that might have been the most exhausting form of understanding in the world. She did not stand up immediately. She looked at Officer Reed. I want the captain's authorization in writing before I leave the seat. The purser does not have the authority to remove a confirmed passenger. That decision belongs to the flight deck. Reed's jaw tightened. He checked his radio. He exchanged a look with the second officer that told her everything she needed to know about how this was going to go, regardless of what she said. She had made her objection. It was on the record now, or it would be, on Dr. Whitfield's recording. She stood up. She pulled her backpack from the overhead bin. She turned to Patricia and said quietly, so only Patricia could hear, you're not kicking me off a plane. You're canceling your entire airline. Patricia's smile was triumph, unguarded and ugly. Enjoy your flight on a budget carrier, sweetie. Zara walked off the plane. She had learned a long time ago that being right and being able to stay were two different things. The door closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence, The jet bridge was empty and cool, the kind of institutional quiet that exists between spaces, between decisions, between the version of events that is still reversible and the version that is not. Zara walked up the slope tunnel at a steady pace, her backpack over one shoulder, her expression composed. She passed the bewildered gate agents without stopping. She came out into the public concourse of Terminal H and kept walking until she found a window that looked directly out onto the tarmac, where she could see the nose of Pinnacle Flight 1112 sitting at the gate. She stopped. She watched the ground crew attaching the tug vehicle to the front landing gear, preparing to push back. She could see the blue glow of the boarding door indicators going dark. The plane was almost ready. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Not the airline app, not her contacts list. She dialed a private number that existed in no directory and was answered by no assistant or receptionist. It rang twice. Zara. The voice was deep, measured, and immediately alert, in the way that certain people are always alert, regardless of the hour or the apparent calm of the moment. Marcus Coleman was 56 years old. He had built Coleman Capital, over 30 years, from a single high-risk real estate play into one of the most powerful private equity firms in the American South. He had a faith that defaulted to stillness in moments of difficulty, the way a body of water goes flat before a storm. He had been a military pilot in his late 20s, one of a small number of black aviators in his training class, a fact that had been noted in various ways by various people for all 4 years of his service. He knew this industry from every angle that existed. "You should be in the air," Marcus said. "Dad." Zara's voice was level. She had learned that from him. "I was removed from the plane by the senior purser and airport security." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Tell me what happened," she told him. All of it, the look in the lounge, the demand for a physical card, the word belong, used 3 times, the security escort off the aircraft. She spoke without emphasis, without editorializing, because she didn't need to. The facts were enough. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. When he spoke again, the father was still present. She could hear him, but something else had come forward. Something that moved the way power moves when it stops being patient. "Which airline?" he said. Not a question. "Pinnacle." "Flight 112. The same Pinnacle whose $950 million bridge loan closes at 4 o'clock this afternoon through Goldman Sachs. The loan I wrote the risk analysis for." Another silence. Then, very quietly, "Go to the private terminal on the south end. I'll have the Gulf Stream in the air within the hour." A pause. "Give me 5 minutes." "Dad." "Zara." His voice was not loud. It never was. "I stood in a first-class boarding line at the same airport 28 years ago, and a gate agent told me I must be in the wrong line. I was wearing my flight suit. I had just flown a government aircraft for 14 hours. I was 28 years old, and I didn't say a word, because I didn't know yet that I had the right to." The silence between them carried something ancient and specific, the particular weight that gets handed down from one generation to the next in Black American families, the weight of knowing exactly what kind of world you live in and having to decide every single morning how you are going to carry it. "You have the right," Marcus said, "and I'm going to make sure this particular airline understands exactly how much it just costs them to forget that." He hung up. Zara stood at the terminal window. On the tarmac below, the tug vehicle had finished connecting to the nose gear. The ground crew was clearing the area. Flight 1112 was about to push back. Zara looked at the plane. She started a silent countdown from 5 minutes in her head. She got to 4 minutes and 30 seconds before things started to go wrong for Pinnacle Airways, and she hadn't even had to do anything yet. The 56th floor of Coleman Tower in Atlanta's Midtown District operated at a frequency most corporate offices never achieved, not the frantic energy of urgency, but the controlled, deliberate velocity of enormous decisions being executed with precision. Marcus Coleman sat behind a desk that had been in his family for 2 generations, a wide slab of reclaimed Georgia pine that his father had built in a workshop in Decatur. He pressed the intercom once. "James, in here, now." James Okafor was Coleman Capital's CFO, 44 years old, Nigerian-American, sharp in the way that good numbers people always are. He came through the glass door in 14 seconds, tablet in hand, already reading the room. The Pinnacle syndication, Marcus said. The $950 million. Where does the wire stand? Held in escrow, James said, his eyes moving quickly across his tablet screen. We're scheduled to release at 3:45 Eastern ahead of the 4-0 creditor window. All documentation is finalized. Goldman confirmed this morning. Pull it, Marcus said. James's thumb stopped over the screen. Sir, invoke the discretionary withdrawal clause. We contributed 40% of the syndicate principal. That's $380 million in escrow under our sole control. Pull our portion. Notify Goldman that Coleman Capital is withdrawing its tranche from the syndicate, effective immediately, under Section 14 of the Participation Agreement. James looked at Marcus for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to verify that this was not a hypothetical, not a stress test, not a negotiating tactic. If we pull now, James said carefully, Pinnacle's liquidity structure collapses before market close. Their credit triggers go to junk by end of day. Fuel vendors will lock the pumps before midnight. We're talking about an airline that, I know what we're talking about, Marcus said. He told James what had happened at O'Hare. He used fewer words than Zara had used. He didn't need more. James closed his eyes for one brief moment. When he opened them, his expression had settled into the flat, professional calm of a man preparing to execute instructions he understood completely. And James, Marcus added, as the CFO turned toward the door, call our legal team first. Then call our 3 activist fund partners and tell them to review their existing short positions in PNK in light of our withdrawal announcement, which will be public in 30 minutes. Everything goes through compliance. Everything is documented. James paused. All three? All 3. James walked out. For the next 4 minutes, Marcus sat at his father's desk and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Atlanta skyline, the glass towers, and the old brick buildings and the sky above it all, clear and bright and indifferent. In Chicago, Gerald Whitmore was in the middle of pouring a glass of 18-year scotch when his phone rang. He answered it with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the hardest part of his week was already behind him. Richard Langford's voice on the other end stripped that confidence away in approximately 10 seconds. Gerald, listen to me. Coleman Capital just pulled out. The wire is dead. They invoked the discretionary clause. The scotch glass hit the floor. That's impossible. We have signed term sheets. The clause overrides the sheets. Our tranche is ring-fenced. The clause is airtight for our portion. Their legal team confirmed it when we negotiated entry. Pulling our share triggers the minimum capital covenant on the full facility. Pinnacle's liquidity ratio falls below the threshold. The Holt loan unravels. Gerald, it gets worse. The activist funds, Bridgepoint, Harrow, and Vance Capital, they began adjusting their short positions in PNK after Coleman's public withdrawal notice hit the wire. It's aggressive, but it's clean. Gerald's hand gripped the edge of his desk. Why? Why would Coleman do this right now? He left a message, Langford said, and his voice had dropped to the tone of someone delivering news at a funeral. He said to look at the manifest for Flight 1112 out of O'Hare, Seat 1A. Ask your crew what they did. Then call your bankruptcy lawyers. In the time it took Gerald Whitmore to sprint from his office to his assistant's desk, Pinnacle's stock ticker had already moved. PNK opened the session at $38 a share. By the time Gerald was screaming for the VP of Operations on line 2, it had dropped to $29. By the time the VP of Operations picked up, it was at $19. The fuel vendor automated alerts went out at 8:47 a.m. Central. 160 Pinnacle aircraft were on the ground or in the air. Within the hour, fuel vendors at major domestic stations had issued formal credit suspension notices, triggering a cascade of operational holds across the network. And somewhere above all of it, on Twitter, a clip posted by a Yale law professor named Dr. James Whitfield was accumulating views at a rate that the Pinnacle PR team, had they been watching, had they had functioning computers, had their internal systems not already begun the slow process of freezing, would have described as unsurvivable. Inside the prestige suite of Flight 1112, the atmosphere had been, for the past 7 minutes, one of satisfied resolution. Patricia moved through the cabin with the particular lightness of a woman who had reasserted the natural order of things. She poured a second mimosa for Vivian Hartwell with, a warmth that hadn't been there before the confrontation. She straightened the already straight pillow on seat 1A, empty now, cream leather unmarked, with a small, private sense of correctness. "I do apologize for the unpleasantness," Patricia said as she passed Stuart Crane, who was attempting to return to his newspaper. Crane made a non-committal sound and didn't look up. "You handled it beautifully," Vivian offered from seat 2A, tilting her champagne flute in a small, satisfied toast. "Honestly, the standards people think they can get away with these days." Patricia smiled. "We simply can't let things slip." In seat 3A, Dr. James Whitfield had not moved since the security officers walked Zara off the plane. He sat with his book closed on his lap and his phone face down on the seat beside him, and he watched Patricia make her rounds with the expression of a man who had read this particular chapter before and knew exactly how it ended. In the cockpit, Captain David Ossie, 51 years old, 24 years of flying, a man who had been the only black pilot on 3 consecutive flight rosters in the first decade of his career, was running through the pre-departure checklist with his first officer when the car's screen lit up red. The system chime cut through the cockpit like an alarm that had never meant anything good. He leaned in and read the message. Then he read it again. "Urgent. All pinnacle operations. Flight 112 hold position. Do not park. Cooperate emergency. Return to gate immediately. Engines off upon our arrival." He sat back. His first officer was already looking at him. "Is this what I think it is?" Ossie said nothing for a moment. He thought about a name he'd just read on the hold notice. Coleman, and something clicked in a place that had nothing to do with procedures. "Tower, Pinnacle 112, he said into his headset, his voice completely controlled. "We have a company emergency directive, requesting immediate taxi routing back to Terminal H. Do not clear us for departure." In the cabin, the engines wound down. The aircraft shuddered to a soft, bewildered halt on taxiway Delta. Vivian Hartwell's champagne sloshed against the side of her flute. Patricia grabbed the forward bulkhead for balance. The PA chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ossie from the flight deck." His voice was steady, but it carried something underneath it. Not panic, but a gravity that passengers register before they understand why. "I apologize for this interruption. We have received a company emergency directive from our corporate headquarters. All Pinnacle Airways operations have been suspended, effective immediately. We are returning to the gate. Please remain seated." The cabin detonated. Vivian's composure evaporated with the speed and completeness of a costume coming off. "What does he mean suspended?" "I have a connecting charter to the Hamptons." Stuart Crane threw his newspaper into the footwell. "I have a board meeting in Miami tomorrow. This is completely unacceptable." Patricia rushed to the cockpit. She punched the access code and pushed through the reinforced door to find Captain Ossie hanging up the satellite phone, looking like a man who had just received news from a direction he hadn't thought to check. He turned and looked at Patricia with an expression that was not anger. It was something harder to deflect than anger. It was recognition. "Seat 1A, he said, "the passenger you had removed." Patricia straightened. She didn't belong. Her name was Zara Coleman, Ossie said. His voice didn't rise. "She is the daughter of Marcus Coleman. She personally authored the financial analysis that convinced Goldman Sachs to structure the $950 million loan that was keeping this airline alive. As of approximately 40 minutes ago, that loan has been pulled. Our stock is in freefall. Our fuel credit is frozen. 160 aircraft are grounded or diverting." Patricia stared at him. "She didn't. She was wearing a hoodie." "Yes," Ossie said. "She was." The first officer had his face in his hands. The slow tow back to Terminal H began 3 minutes later. Patricia stood at the forward galley curtain and felt the world she had built for herself over 28 years rearranging itself into something she couldn't recognize. The jet bridge door was pulled open from outside before the aircraft had fully docked. Derek Nash came through it, the way a person enters a room when the room is on fire, and they are both the firefighter and partly responsible for the fire. He was VP of European and Domestic Hub Operations, 47 years old, and he had the expression of a man who had been on the phone with Chicago, Atlanta, Goldman Sachs, and the FAA in the last 20 minutes, and had lost something in all of them. He walked through the prestige suite without looking at the passengers. Though they all looked at him, the disheveled tie, the flushed face, the iPad clutched like a weapon. His eyes found Patricia immediately. He stopped. Patricia. Patricia stood at the galley wall, her hands folded in front of her. Her chin lifted, with the last remaining fragment of the authority she had spent her career constructing. Derek, if you would just let me explain. Stop. The word wasn't loud. It was the kind of word that stops things by its nature, not its volume. Tell me what you did. I protected the integrity of the cabin. The passenger didn't have. She had a verified boarding pass that cleared the gate scanner. Derek said, his voice pulling tighter with each word. She was confirmed on the manifest. She had given you her name, her credentials, and a documented corporate account. And you had police physically remove her from the aircraft because she was wearing a sweatshirt. From the Prestige suite, the passengers were still. Stuart Crane had stopped looking out the window. Dr. Whitfield sat with his hands in his lap and watched. Our stock is at $11, Derek continued. It opened this morning at 38. We have 160 aircraft grounded because our fuel credit line doesn't exist anymore. We have passengers stranded at 42 airports in 11 countries. The FAA is on hold, waiting to explain why we can't clear the gates. He reached forward. His fingers found the gold purser wings pinned to Patricia's lapel. He pulled. The pins gave way with a sound that was very small and absolute, 2 tiny points of resistance, and then nothing. Patricia's hand went to the place on her uniform where they had been. The 2 small holes in the fabric looked like a punctuation mark she hadn't written. You are terminated for cause. Effective this moment, Derek said. That means no pension, no severance, no flight benefits. You are not an employee of this airline. I have 28 years, Patricia said. Her voice had changed. The architecture of her certainty was coming apart at the joints. You don't have a job, Derek said. He nodded to the 2 officers who had followed him onto the aircraft. Escort her off. Remove her credentials. Walk her to the public curb. Captain Osei had come out of the cockpit. He stood at the bulkhead where the cockpit curtain met the cabin entrance, and he watched Patricia being directed toward her roller bag under the overhead bin. He did not look away. When Patricia passed him, he said quietly, without hostility, I want you to understand something. This didn't happen to you because you made a mistake. It happened because you made a choice. There's a difference. Patricia didn't answer. She couldn't. She pulled her roller bag out from the crew storage and walked the length of the Prestige suite toward the jet bridge. The passengers she had served, charmed and protected for 28 years, looked away. Every one of them. Vivian Hartwell found something extremely interesting in the depths of her Chanel bag. Stuart Crane had returned to the window. Only Dr. Whitfield watched her go, not with satisfaction, not with contempt, but with the quiet, clinical attention of someone documenting what they see. The jet bridge door closed behind Patricia with a sound that was exactly as final as it needed to be. Derek turned from the jet bridge door. The cabin was still, everyone looking at him or at nothing in particular. His eyes moved to seat 2A. Vivian Hartwell had set her champagne down and was studying the interior of her Chanel bag with great concentration. Ma'am, she looked up. Your name is in the cabin record as a witness to the incident. Our legal team will be in contact. It was not an accusation. It was simply information, delivered without drama. Vivian opened her mouth and closed it again. It was, for her, an entirely new experience. Being seen as part of something she had assumed she was merely watching. She said nothing. For the first time since boarding, she had absolutely nothing to say. Derek Nash picked up the PA microphone and told the passengers that Flight 1112 was canceled, that all Pinnacle operations were suspended, and that there were no customer service agents available to assist them because the company systems had been locked by creditors. He set the microphone down before the shouting fully started. He had 2 more phone calls to make, and neither of them was going to go well. The Coleman Tower boardroom on the 56th floor had a wall of glass that looked north across Atlanta toward the hazy line of the Appalachian foothills. And on clear mornings like this one, the view was the kind that made certain decisions feel appropriately large. Marcus Coleman sat at the head of the boardroom table and watched his phone. He was not making calls. He was waiting for one. At 9:14 a.m. Eastern, The speakerphone at the center of the table clicked. A digital tone sounded. Then, Gerald Whitmore's voice came through, a voice stripped of its scotch and celebration texture, now carrying the raw, nauseated quality of a man who had fully understood the situation and was trying to find a door that no longer existed. Marcus. No response. Marcus, I need you to hear me. I will terminate the entire flight crew. I will issue a public apology to Zara. A personal one. Whatever she wants. I'll put her on the board. I'll rewrite our entire diversity framework. I'll Gerald. Marcus's voice was level. Not cold. Not hot. Level. The way a surface is level when it cannot be moved. This is not a negotiation. I understand that you're angry. I'm not angry, Marcus said. He paused long enough for the silence to do its work. I'm clear. There's a difference between anger and clarity. Anger wants to punish. Clarity just wants to be accurate. He leaned forward slightly in his chair. This is not the first time Patricia Holloway profiled a passenger. She has 2 documented internal complaints, both filed by black passengers, both buried by your HR department. Your management team knew. Your operations leadership knew. Nobody did anything because she kept the premium cabin running smoothly. For people who looked the way Patricia thought premium cabin passengers were supposed to look. You didn't build a bad employee. You built a system that made her possible. And then you protected her. The boardroom in Chicago was audibly silent on the other end. What do you want? Gerald said. His voice was barely above a whisper. I don't want to be your creditor anymore, Marcus said. Coleman Capital, along with Bridgepoint, Harrow, and Vance Capital, have been accumulating Pinnacle shares in the open market over the past 6 weeks under separate Schedule 13D filings. We have been patient, Gerald. As of this morning's trading session, our combined disclosed position stands at 31%. We have tender offer documents prepared and ready to file with the SEC before market close today. By the end of next week, we will have 51%. This has been planned for some time. A sharp intake of breath from someone in the Chicago room. We're doing a hostile takeover, Gerald said. Not a question. A corrective acquisition, Marcus said. There's a distinction. I'm not buying Pinnacle to break it apart. I'm buying it because it employs 11,000 people who had nothing to do with what happened in Seat 1A this morning, and they deserve to work for a company that doesn't operate on the assumption that certain passengers need to prove themselves. My first act as majority shareholder will be to dissolve the current board and replace the executive leadership. My second will be to inject $1.1 billion in private capital to stabilize operations. Another silence. You're firing me, Gerald said. I'm removing the conditions that made this morning possible, Marcus said. That starts with you. Gerald, I spent 28 years making sure I was never in a position where someone could tell my daughter she didn't belong somewhere she had every right to be. She was in that position anyway. That tells me the problem is bigger than one person. It's the culture. It's the room. It's the table. He paused. Pack your office. The SEC filing goes through by midnight. Then, before he ended the call, he said something he had not planned to say but found was true. This is not about revenge. It never was. This is about what it costs to keep pretending that some people have to earn the right to basic dignity and other people just get it by default. Pinnacle has been charging that cost to people who had no say in it. That stops today. He disconnected. James Okafor was watching him from across the table. The rebranding timeline, Marcus said. Begin immediately. I want Coleman Airways livery designs and brand identity finalized within 60 days. The regulatory path runs in parallel. James has the FAA recertification schedule. The planes wear the new colors the day the certificate clears. And the logo? Marcus looked out at the Atlanta skyline. He thought about a young man in a flight suit, standing at an airline counter, being told to check his line. He thought about his daughter's voice on the phone, composed and clear, and carrying something she shouldn't have had to carry. The T-38 wings, Marcus said. From my old unit. I know exactly what that aircraft means to me, and I want it on the tail of every plane we fly. 27 months after the grounding of Flight 1112, Coleman Airways' Chicago hub was a different kind of building. The mahogany and heavy drapes of the Pinnacle era were gone. In their place was open floor plan with glass walls and natural light, the kind of workspace that trusted the people inside it. At the center of the executive floor, in a conference room that looked out over the same Lake Michigan view that Gerald Whitmore had once celebrated with expensive scotch. Coleman Airways Chief Strategy Officer, a title that had not existed at Pinnacle, and that Zara had designed herself, along with the job description, sat at the head of a long table and read the Q3 numbers. Premium cabin revenue is up 38% year over year, James Okafor reported, standing at the projection screen with the ease of someone who had learned that good news, delivered clearly, was its own form of respect. Total revenue per available seat mile outperforms Delta by 7 points and United by 11. The market hasn't just forgiven the Pinnacle transition. Analysts are actively citing us as the benchmark for culture-driven financial recovery. Zara tapped her pen once against her notepad. The Coleman Protocol. It wasn't a question, but James answered it. Fully deployed across all 43 domestic hubs and 17 international stations. The blockchain ticketing system has eliminated gate verification disputes entirely. We've had zero confirmed discrimination complaints in the premium cabin since launch. The Coleman Protocol was the system Zara had spent 6 months designing with a team of engineers from 3 different Silicon Valley firms. At its core, it was simple. Once a ticket was purchased and the passenger's biometric and digital identity were registered, the system locked. Scan green board. Any override of a confirmed boarding pass required written authorization from the captain, documented in real time through the system, with the specific reason logged and time-stamped. No purser could remove a passenger from a confirmed seat without the captain's explicit digital sign-off. No decision about a passenger's right to board could be made based on anything the system had not flagged. The override existed. It had to, for safety, but it left a permanent, auditable trail. That trail was the point. But the protocol was only 1/3 of what Zara had built. The second layer was structural. Every Coleman Airways flight attendant now wore a body-mounted camera that recorded any passenger interaction flagged as a complaint. Not surveillance, but accountability, working in both directions. Crews knew it. Passengers knew it. The knowledge changed the room. The third layer was cultural. Valerie Chen, the surviving COO from the Pinnacle era, had overseen the redesign of every training module in the company. 98% of cabin crew had completed the new bias awareness and de-escalation curriculum. The 2% who refused were offered early severance packages with full benefits. None of them stayed. One more item, Zara said, looking at her notes. The Coleman Foundation Scholarship Cohort. 23 students, Valerie confirmed. 12 in aviation programs, 8 in aerospace engineering, 3 in aviation law, all from underrepresented communities. The first cohort enrolled 14 months ago. The earliest graduates complete their programs in approximately 2.5 years from now. Zara nodded. Then she set down her pen and looked at the people around the table. James, Valerie, the new legal counsel, the head of operations, and said something she hadn't planned to say in the meeting, but found was necessary. I want to be clear about something. We didn't build this because of what happened to me. What happened to me was the moment when a system that had been hurting people quietly for years finally made enough noise to be heard. The goal was never revenge. It was never even accountability, not primarily. The goal was to build a place where a 20-year-old with a canvas backpack and a Harvard hoodie can sit in seat 1A and have that be the most boring, unremarkable thing that has ever happened. She paused. When that's boring, we've done our job. 2 years after the grounding of Flight 1112, on a different kind of Tuesday morning, gray and rain-slicked and entirely uncinematic, Patricia Holloway stood behind the counter of a cut-rate luggage outlet in Gary, Indiana, and scanned barcodes under fluorescent lights that flickered every few minutes, as if even the building was tired. She was 56 now. She felt older. The Pinnacle uniform was long gone, replaced by a maroon polyester polo with a cartoon suitcase on the breast pocket. Her lawyer's fees had taken her savings. The lawsuit had been dismissed with prejudice. The union had declined to represent her on the grounds of federal boarding protocol violations and documented discriminatory conduct. Her husband had filed for divorce 4 months after the incident, citing irreconcilable financial and reputational differences, a phrase that meant, "I can't be in this anymore." She had been recognized in a grocery store once, 3 months after the viral audio clip, and had left her cart in the aisle and walked to her car. She didn't go back to that store. In the small break room behind the counter, a wall-mounted television was tuned permanently to CNBC. One afternoon, the screen showed Davos, the World Economic Forum, and on the panel stage, in a sharp midnight blue blazer over a white t-shirt, was Zara Coleman. The interviewer asked, "Do you harbor any resentment toward the people responsible for what happened on that flight?" Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No. I think about the woman who made that choice sometimes. Not with anger. I think she spent a very long time believing that her value came from being better than someone. That's an exhausting way to live. I think what she discovered is that the hierarchy she was protecting didn't protect her back. That's a painful lesson. I genuinely hope she finds something better to build her life on." Patricia picked up the remote and turned the TV off. She stood in the small, flickering room for a long time. Then she went back to the counter, because the shift didn't end for 3 more hours. The first Coleman Airways commercial flight, the culmination of 18 months of regulatory filings, fleet recertification, and staff retraining under the new carrier certificate, took off from Chicago O'Hare on a bright Thursday morning. The aircraft was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, freshly repainted. On the tail fin, in navy blue against pearl white, were the stylized spread wings of a Northrop T-38 Talon, the aircraft that Marcus Coleman had flown in the United States Air Force, the aircraft that had trusted him completely at 30,000 feet, long before any first-class lounge on any concourse in any American airport was prepared to do the same. The cabin was the same one. The leather was different, warmer, deeper, the color of good earth. The seats had been redesigned. The galley had been redesigned. Every surface that could be changed had been changed, not for aesthetics, but for signal. The signal that this was not the same place it had been, and that the difference was intentional and permanent. In seat 3A, Dr. James Whitfield sat with a book in his lap and the satisfied, slightly tired expression of a man who had watched something ugly transform into something worth watching. He had been offered the seat by Coleman Foundation as recognition for the role his recording had played in the federal investigation, a class-action civil case that had resulted in a $47 million settlement, including punitive damages for 23 passengers who had documented racial discrimination by Pinnacle cabin crew over the preceding 5 years. The size of the award reflected not individual incidents, but the court's finding of systematic institutional negligence. Pinnacle's management had received formal complaints, had documented them, and had chosen to do nothing. He had donated the equivalent value of his ticket to the Coleman Foundation Scholarship Fund. The forward galley was staffed by a new crew. Their briefing that morning had covered the Coleman Protocol, the de-escalation certification, and one additional item that appeared on no Pinnacle training document, a 5-minute reading from the new Passenger Bill of Rights that Zara Coleman had written personally, which began, "Every person who boards this aircraft arrives with full and unconditional human dignity. Our role is not to assess that dignity, it is to serve it." Marcus Coleman boarded late, through the forward door, wearing a navy jacket over an open-collar white shirt. He paused at the threshold of the cabin, an old habit from military boarding procedures, and looked at the rows ahead of him. He had been on hundreds of aircraft. He had logged more flight hours than most of the commercial pilots at this airline. He had walked into more rooms than he could count while preparing, always. For the moment, someone's expression shifted when they understood who they were looking at. He paused for one breath longer than necessary. Then he walked forward to seat 2A and sat down. No one looked at him with anything, except the mild, incurious attention of fellow travelers minding their own business. It was, in its quiet way, the most remarkable thing that had happened to him in a very long time. Zara was the last to board. She came through the forward door in dark jeans and a black hoodie, the new Coleman Airways version, midnight navy, with the T-38 wings embroidered small on the left chest. On the back, in clean sans-serif letters, "You belong here." She stowed her backpack in the overhead bin above seat 1A. She sat down. She looked out the window at the O'Hare tarmac, at the other aircraft moving in their slow, ordered procession toward the runways, each one carrying its own cargo of trust. The trust that the machine would hold, that the crew would perform, that the passenger would arrive somewhere they were expected. She thought about Patricia Holloway, behind a counter somewhere in a gray suburb, scanning barcodes under bad lighting. She didn't think about it with satisfaction. She thought about it, the way you think about a scar that has healed but not disappeared, as a thing that happened, that shaped you, that you would not have chosen, that you could not unknow. Then she let it go, because the work in front of her was more important than the wound behind her. From a few rows back, a small voice said, "Mama, look, she has the same wings as the plane." Zara turned in seat 5B. A girl who was approximately 8 years old was pointing at Zara's hoodie with the unself-conscious accuracy of children identifying exactly what they see. The mother was 30-something, wearing her good coat, looking at the cabin around her with the expression of someone experiencing a thing they had imagined for a long time. It was their first time in the premium cabin. They were part of the first cohort of Coleman Airways' Social Equity Fare program, which made 8 seats on every flight available at subsidized rates to passengers who qualified based on income. The girl met Zara's eyes with complete directness. "Who are you?" she asked. Zara unclipped her seatbelt and turned in her seat to face the girl directly. She looked at her at eye level. "My name is Zara," she said. "I work here." The girl considered this. "Did you make the wings?" "Sort of," Zara said. "My dad flew a plane with these wings a long time ago, back when some people didn't think he belonged up there. So we put the wings here to make sure nobody forgets that he did, that all of us do." The girl looked at the embroidered wings on Zara's chest, then at the tail fin visible through the oval window, the same wings, 20 times larger, catching the morning light. "Oh," the girl said, with the gravity of someone who has understood something real. The engine spooled up. The aircraft began to move. In seat 1A, Zara Coleman pulled out her laptop, opened the first-year Q4 planning document, and got to work. The runway unspooled ahead of them, gray and long and ending in sky. At rotation speed, the nose lifted. The wheels left the ground. Coleman Airways Flight 1, departing from the same gate, the same tarmac, the same runway that had once held Pinnacle Flight 1112, climbed into the clear Chicago morning and did not look back. The future was now the only direction that mattered. And every single person on that aircraft, in every seat, in every row, from the flight deck to the last row of economy, belonged there completely. No proof required. If this story hit you somewhere real, like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment telling me which moment got you the most, and let me know where in the world you are watching this right now.